My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 36 years old, and I used to be a first lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. These days, I live in a tent behind a half-abandoned strip mall on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. That morning, the sun hadn't even fully risen, but I was already up. Hunger will do that to you. I was behind a gas station, checking a dumpster I knew from experience sometimes had decent leftovers. If you're wondering, yes, it's humiliating. But when you've gone 3 days with nothing but warm water and a bruised banana, shame starts taking a back seat to survival. I was elbow deep in a black trash bag when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. It was clean, sharp, and expensive. I didn't turn around right away. My mind played tricks on me sometimes, bringing back voices I thought I'd buried. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and with that exact sarcastic lilt I'd hoped never to hear again. Still living in that pathetic tent, Ethan? I turned, and there she was, Lauren, my ex-wife, in a business suit, holding an iced coffee in one hand and a designer bag in the other, staring at me like I was something she stepped in. Her hair was lighter, maybe a new stylist, and her wedding ring had been replaced with something even bigger. Apparently, trading husbands worked out well for her. I stood there with half a sandwich in my hand and mustard on my sleeve. I wanted to say something clever, something sharp enough to cut through her smug little smirk, but I just froze. All those months of pain, regret, and bitterness welled up like acid in my chest, but no words came out. I just nodded once, tossed the sandwich back in the bag, and zipped my hoodie all the way up. She gave a short, fake laugh, the kind you hear from people who think they've already won. Then she turned to the guy waiting beside the SUV and said something I couldn't catch. He glanced over at me with a mix of pity and disgust before they both got in and drove off like I wasn't even real. The silence that followed was worse than the insult. It was the silence of being erased, of being a ghost in the life you used to live. I stood there for a few minutes, pretending to adjust my gear, but really just trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I told myself it didn't matter, that her opinion didn't mean a damn thing, that I had a bigger mission, a bigger purpose. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. Not because she was right, but because she thought she was. And part of me hated that I'd given her enough reasons to believe it. I went back to the tent and sat in silence for a while, chewing the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Then I opened the encrypted phone in my pocket. I had work to do. I wasn't always a guy pulling sandwiches out of dumpsters. After I left the Marines, I actually did pretty well for myself. I landed a project manager position at a construction firm that handled contracts for government buildings, and the pay was solid enough for a mortgage on a modest home and a reliable used Jeep. Lauren and I got married 6 months after I started the job. We dated off and on during my last deployment, and it felt like we were finally in sync. She liked the stability, the clean schedule, the fact that I wasn't getting shot at anymore. I liked the idea of building a normal life with someone who saw me as more than just a uniform. We bought a little place in Mesa with a backyard full of rocks and a patio I planned to refinish myself. Things were good for about 2 years. Routine, even. I woke up at 6, worked 12-hour shifts, came home, grilled chicken, and passed out. Lauren started taking courses online for interior design. We talked about starting a family once her business got off the ground. From the outside, it looked like progress. But deep down, I felt restless. See, when you've been in high-stakes combat zones, suburbia feels oddly silent. You miss the edge, the purpose, the sense that what you do actually matters. That itch never fully went away, even when I was putting together project timelines or arguing with city inspectors about concrete codes. So when a former contact from my military days reached out with a low-key government opportunity, I didn't hesitate. It started simple. I was asked to observe a few construction bids that didn't quite make sense. Same contractors winning unusual projects. I flagged a few inconsistencies, got pulled deeper. Turned out there was a suspected shell company involved in illegal material transfers. Weapons-grade biological agents. The kind that don't belong anywhere near a civilian shipping port. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. Of course, I couldn't tell Lauren any of this. Everything was black bag classified, with layers of misdirection. Officially, I was still just a contractor. Unofficially, I was working with an offshoot agency that doesn't even have a name on paper. My job became twofold: maintain my cover as a guy whose life was falling apart, and get close to a small network of ex-military brokers funneling biotech components through private channels. To play that role, I had to take real risks. I pulled money out of our joint account to invest in a phony development pitch. It tanked, publicly. That was by design. But Lauren didn't know that. All she saw was a man unraveling. I tried to explain parts of it, not everything, just enough to keep her steady. But secrets have a way of poisoning even good intentions. She stopped trusting me. I started sleeping in the guest room. We lost the house after I missed too many payments. That wasn't planned. I took a hit harder than expected when one of the fake investments actually got flagged for fraud. Lauren left 2 days after the foreclosure letter came in. She didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just packed up and said she couldn't do this anymore. I watched her drive away with the last of her boxes and knew she wasn't coming back, and as much as I wanted to chase her, to explain, I didn't. Because the mission had reached a point where things were too tangled, too close. I had names now, locations, patterns. Walking away meant leaving everything exposed. So I leaned into the role, sold the Jeep, bought a tent, learned which overpasses were safe to sleep under, and which dumpsters had edible scraps by noon. I made noise when I had to, stayed invisible the rest of the time. Somewhere out there, a shipment of modified anthrax strains had gone missing, and I wasn't going to be the guy who let it slide. People look at me now and think I lost everything. But they don't know I'm still fighting a war, just not the kind with uniforms and medals. This one's quiet, dirtier, but maybe, in its own way, even more important. After everything with Lauren, after losing the house, the job, the illusion of normal life, I found myself on the road with nowhere left to go but sideways. I remembered my dad's older brother, Uncle Walter, who lived about 3 hours north in a dusty little town that barely registered on most maps. We hadn't talked in years, but I figured if anyone could understand what I was going through, maybe it was him. Uncle Walter was a retired Air Force colonel, the kind of man who ironed his jeans and never threw out a coffee can without finding a second use for it. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, sunburned, thin, and road-worn, he didn't ask any questions. He just stepped aside and said the guest room was still where it always was. That kind of silence said more than any sympathy could. On the third night, we sat on the porch with a bottle of something cheap and strong. The stars above us looked clearer than they had in months. I finally asked him the question that had haunted me since I was a kid. What really happened to my dad? All I ever knew was the story Mom told me. He had a heart attack during a solo hunting trip when I was 8. Nobody, no funeral, just a closed casket and a folded flag. Walter was quiet for a while, then sighed in that long, tired way that lets you know the next words will change everything. He told me my dad didn't die of a heart attack. He disappeared during an off-book operation linked to a joint intelligence task force. No one ever officially confirmed his status, but those who knew understood he'd likely been killed in action. Or worse, captured. I couldn't breathe. My dad, who I thought had just quit on life, had actually given it trying to protect something. Walter handed me a thin, leather-bound notebook filled with cryptic entries. It had been mailed to him 6 months after my dad vanished, with no return address. The pages were filled with numbers, coordinates, and initials I didn't recognize. But one symbol caught my eye. It was etched into the inside of the cover, a small triangle intersected by a line. I'd seen it before, on the folder I was handed during my first covert briefing for the mission I was currently working. It wasn't a coincidence. Somehow, we'd both been tied to the same shadow unit. Maybe my recruitment hadn't been random after all. Maybe they were keeping tabs on me because of who my father was. The thought hit like a sledgehammer. All those years I'd carried shame, guilt, and anger for growing up without a dad, and here he was, risking everything on a mission no one could even acknowledge. He hadn't abandoned us. He'd sacrificed himself without ever getting credit. I spent the rest of the night poring over the notebook, trying to decipher the notes. One of the sets of coordinates matched a place not far from where I'd found shelter weeks earlier. It was remote, undeveloped land once owned by the government. I made a copy of the page, folded it into my wallet, and thanked Uncle Walter before I left. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew one thing for certain: my father's story wasn't finished. And maybe, just maybe, neither was mine. The place was falling apart. My dad's old cabin sat on the edge of a scrubland ridge, nearly swallowed by dust and time. Windows cracked, weeds taller than the porch rail, and the whole place creaked like a shipwreck. I went there mostly out of instinct. After reading through that notebook, I had this itch in my gut that told me the cabin was hiding something. Not memories, something real. I walked the floor slowly, pressing down with each step like I was testing for mines. The boards near the fireplace gave the usual complaint, but one plank near the back corner creaked sharper than the rest. Not louder, just different. Hollow. It sounded like space beneath it. I stepped on it again, harder this time, and felt a slight give, just enough to raise suspicion. I grabbed the small pry bar from my pack and knelt. Sweat clung to my spine as I wedged it between the edges. The wood resisted, groaning like it hadn't been disturbed in decades, but then it popped loose with a crack that echoed through the room. Underneath was a square of metal, a hatch bolted to the subfloor. No handle, just a recessed groove the size of a coin. I slid my military challenge coin into the groove without thinking, and to my surprise, it clicked. The hatch swung open slowly, revealing a narrow hole lined with plastic and foam. It wasn't deep, maybe 2 feet, but what was inside made my breath catch. A sealed hard case, military grade. And under it, a bundle of envelopes marked with red ink, all stamped classified in block letters I hadn't seen since Afghanistan. I pulled the case out gently and sat cross-legged on the floor. The weight of it pressed into my lap like it held something more than just data. I opened one of the envelopes and found a map of the Southwest region with 3 locations circled in thick red marker. Next to the map was a printed list of names, some with addresses, others with code names. My heart beat harder as I recognized 2 of the names. They were on the suspect list I'd been compiling for my own investigation. My dad had been tracking them too, long before I even knew they existed. I closed the case slowly, knowing this changed everything. The mission wasn't just mine anymore. It was his. It was ours. The hard drive took hours to crack. I used an old secure laptop I'd stashed during a past mission, one I knew had the tools for deep encryption work. Once I bypassed the first layer, a flood of files opened. Dozens of folders, each tagged with operation codes, dates, and disturbing keywords like aerosol vector, incubation zones, and field viability. I scanned line after line, and what I saw made my stomach turn. It wasn't just theoretical. There were blueprints for dispersal devices disguised as HVAC components. Shipping manifests with fake donor organizations listed as senders. And one name appeared again and again in emails between shell companies and silent partners. Tyler Grange, Lauren's new husband. The man she left me for. I sat back, heart pounding. Tyler wasn't just some hedge fund sleaze who married up. He was the financial architect of a bioweapon trafficking ring. And Lauren, was she just a bystander, or was she part of it? My hands shook as I opened a folder labeled Phase Z. Inside were documents referencing a transfer of active samples to a research facility in Nevada, the same facility I'd been surveilling for weeks. This wasn't just corruption. This was a planned attack. I couldn't breathe. I kept staring at the screen, trying to convince myself it was a simulation, some kind of training op my dad had been building as a contingency drill. But the timestamps were current. The comms were real. My father had died trying to stop this. And now, it was right in front of me. I copied everything. Every folder, every message, every diagram. I encrypted the data 3 different ways and sent it up to the black site contact protocol I'd been given when I first got roped into this mission. I didn't wait for approval. I didn't care about the chain of command. If I sat on this another day, innocent people were going to die. I didn't know yet who I could trust, but I knew who I couldn't. I looked out the cabin window at the quiet desert beyond the ridge. Nothing moved. Nothing warned you when the world was about to catch fire. My father had tried to stop it once. This time, I wouldn't let it slip through. The gala was held at a private estate tucked into the hills outside Santa Barbara. Black cars lined the curved driveway, and sharp-dressed guests floated across the marble entrance like they belonged on magazine covers. I arrived in a borrowed tux, clean-shaven for the first time in months, carrying nothing but a vintage watch with a mic in the clasp and a set of coordinates burned into my memory. It was showtime. Inside, everything smelled like money. Polished crystal, rare wine, the kind of catered food nobody actually finishes. But underneath it all was the tension. The kind of invisible weight that comes when too many secrets sit in one room. My job was simple. Confirm the handoff between Tyler and the biotech broker, signal the agents posted around the perimeter, and stay alive long enough to see it end. Tyler was easy to spot. Always was. Big smile, hand on every shoulder, playing the generous host like he didn't have weaponized death stashed in a lab 2 states over. I stayed in the background, letting the crowd swirl around me until I saw him pull a sleek silver case from under the bar and pass it to a man with no name tag and an accent too neutral to place. I gave the signal. Seconds later, the lights went out, a sharp voice shouted for everyone to freeze. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed, crystal shattered, and armed agents flooded the room like a wave. Tyler tried to bolt, but 2 agents tackled him hard enough to knock over a table. I didn't move. I kept my hands where they could see them and waited for the dust to settle. And then I saw her. Across the room, hair pinned up in a deep green gown like nothing had ever touched her. Lauren. But it wasn't just her presence that froze me. It was the badge on her belt and the earpiece in her right ear. She was walking toward Tyler, issuing commands, directing agents like she'd done this 100 times, and then she looked at me. It hit like a punch to the ribs. She wasn't just married to Tyler, she was part of it. Embedded, deep cover, or maybe something worse. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge me, just brushed past like I was part of the wallpaper. An agent handed me a comm and told me I was clear to leave. The debrief would happen off-site. I walked out into the night in a daze, every nerve buzzing. None of it made sense. Had she been working against Tyler? With him? Was the marriage part of the act, or had she switched sides somewhere along the line? I sat in the back of a transport van, watching the estate disappear behind us. My thoughts were racing too fast to grab hold of. I'd come here for justice, for answers. But what I got was more questions, and the sick twist that the one person who once knew me best had been living a double life that might have cost innocent lives. All I knew for sure was this: my father died trying to stop a monster. And tonight, I helped drag that monster into the light. But the woman I once loved, she had her own shadows now. And whatever role she played in all this, I'd find out. One way or another, they offered me a check big enough to start a new life. One without tents, without public showers, without suspicion in every glance from strangers. I could have taken it. God knows I thought about it. But in the end, I said no. I asked for something different. A grant to restore an old military outpost on the edge of the desert. It had been abandoned for years, the kind of place people forget existed. But my father served there once. It meant something. So I pitched them an idea. A center for veterans who had nowhere else to go. A place to get a hot meal, a clean bed, a fresh start. Not charity, brotherhood. It took months, but they said yes. I spent my mornings pouring concrete and my nights sleeping under the stars. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Word spread. A few guys from my old unit showed up, then some younger vets. Then a woman who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan and couldn't bear the silence of a regular apartment. We patched walls, shared stories, fixed broken plumbing and broken spirits. Slowly, it came alive. I kept my tent, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember. That dark season of my life taught me who I really was. Not a rank, not a title, just a man who still believed in showing up, even when no one's watching. Honor doesn't need medals. It shows up in the quiet choices you make when the world isn't looking. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the years I lost. The pain, the betrayal, the nights I didn't eat. I don't. Because those years gave me something most people spend a lifetime chasing. Clarity, purpose, peace. I look around now and see faces that remind me of who I fought beside, who did lose it, who I became. I don't have much, but I have enough. And more importantly, I have something money can't buy. Dignity, community, a second chance. So if you see someone sleeping rough, don't assume their story is finished. They might be carrying the weight of battles you'll never see. And they might just be the strongest person in the room. I may be homeless by address, but I am rich in every way that matters. Because I chose to live with honor, and that's something no one can take away.